Hello and welcome back. Today we'll be talking about Black Wall Street, specifically the question, how has being black in America affected economic opportunities? So I just want to start off with this quote and image. So um, I'm just going to read this quote aloud. Lurid flames roared and belched and licked their forked tongues into the air. Smoke ascended the sky in thick black volumes, and amid it all, the planes, now a dozen or more in number, still hummed and darted here and there with the agility of natural birds of the air. So, what do you think this speaker is describing, and where do you think it happened, and why? So, just take a couple seconds, pause the video right here, and just think about that yourself, and look at this image on the right here, and sort of visualize what's happening right now. Okay, so this quote is discussing the Tulsa Massacre, which is what we're going to talk about in today's lesson. So, what it's describing sounds like a battlefield or um, somewhere getting bombed or something, but this happened in America, in Tulsa, Oklahoma, which is one of the two big cities in Oklahoma, in case you weren't aware of that. So, Tulsa's Greenwood district is located in northern Tulsa, and in 1906, a wealthy black man named O.W. Gurley moved to Tulsa and bought 40 plus acres of land. And if you look at the map on the right here, this is this is Tulsa, and highlighted in green right here is the Greenwood district. So he only sold this land to other African Americans, and this led to the creation of Greenwood, Tulsa, or the Black Wall Street like area. So Black Wall Street is what Greenwood was called after a while, and it grew, and Tulsa itself grew into a center of black wealth. It was a modern upper class black community, and it had like banks, hotels, restaurants, movie theaters, and just other things you would associate with like an affluent society. So if you think about where upper class people live now, like with their mansions and big houses and large swimming pools, so it just demonstrated, black success and black wealth. And black businesses thrive there because if you think about for a second how the economy works, um, even if you yourself are well off and you build a business, if people around you aren't able to shop there, you're going to go out of business, right? So, a community like this allowed for the creation of like a separate economy that allowed black people to thrive and build business without having to worry about racism and attacks from jealous white homeowners, or like jealous white homeowners who were like burning down their houses, or white competitors in the same business trying to drive down their sales. Within a community like this, they were able to like create a safe zone in which they were just able to live and become financially independent and just succeed. So, another like feature of this community was the excellent school system they had. At the time, segregation meant that many people weren't able to send their children to good schools because all of the black schools were heavily underfunded and just weren't cared about by the government and the Department of Education. So black people in this community built their own schools and hired their own teachers and poured money into it to ensure that their children would have a good quality education. So many people in the community had a net worth of several $1,000s, which doesn't sound like a lot now, but back then it was a huge amount of money because you have to keep in mind that inflation has caused money to lose value. So they achieved all of this despite rampant racial discrimination, which I mean, obviously, being discriminated against in every facet of society is gonna cause you to be unable to do some things because you're simply not given the tools to succeed. So the fact that they were able to build this community out of nothing um, tells us that despite rampant hostility and discrimination and violence throughout the years, Black people have fought back and built their own communities and have been able to continue living the best life that they possibly could. So, as the wealth of the Black community increased, white resentment in the area also increased, and it caused a massive resurgence of the Ku Klux Klan to Tulsa and increased racial tensions there. In 1919, anti-Black race riots erupted, which caused the destruction of many Black businesses and led to violence. In 1921, a 19-year-old Black shoeshiner, Dick Rowland, was accused of raping the 17-year-old white elevator operator, Sarah Page. So basically, he was accused of attacking her in the elevator. And this is pretty much an unsubstantiated claim. It most definitely didn't happen. It was just an excuse to start the Tulsa Massacre. So um, when Roland was arrested, he was brought to the courthouse for trial, and an angry white mob surrounded the courthouse demanding that he be handed over to them. So a group of 75 Black men went to guard Roland, and the white mob began to attack them, and there were clashes. And the police made things even worse by deputizing and arming white men. And this white armed mob that was not protected by the law because they were deputized, which essentially means they were given the powers of police officers for the duration of the incident. This mob descended on Greenwood, and it looted and destroyed buildings. It shot Black people. Basically, it was just continuous violence against Black people based off of jealousy and anger that they were able to achieve so much. And on the right here is a photograph of Greenwood after the massacre, and it's captioned "Running the Negro Out of Tulsa." So it was definitely taken, probably taken by a white person in celebration of the horrific things that they were doing. So in the aftermath of the massacre, Greenwood was almost totally burned down and destroyed. And the riots were actually blamed on Black people rioting and their criminality, which is actually very reminiscent of what's happening today with Black Lives Matter protests, in which Black people, march for their lives and then are blamed for riots and destruction, in which property is deemed more important than lives. So government and private community companies work together to prevent the Black community from rebuilding. They made sure that they weren't able to get compensation for the destruction, and the government bought up land and brought prices down, and then gave that land to white people. And basically, these companies and the government just were working to ensure that there was a white majority in Tulsa, and that Black people were once again in the minority, so they'd be easier to control, and so that they would be able to achieve economic success again as they had. Greenwood was rebuilt by the 1940s, but it never regained the prominence and wealth it had during the early 1900s, because ultimately, Black wealth threatened white power. If Black people were wealthy, they wouldn't have to depend on white people for things. They could just build up their own community separate. And white people wouldn't be able to feel the superiority of essentially subjugating them. Money is all about power. And by destroying their source of income, Black people's source of income, white people were once again able to regain their power. So, just to finish off here, I want you to think about how did the narrative of the Tulsa Massacre change between black and white people? And how did this affect public perception? So, just pause the video for a second and just think about that question for a minute and then start it up again and I'll tell you my own thoughts. Okay, so while researching this episode, I came across some interesting documents that told of the perspective, that told the story from the view of black people and white people. And there was a stark difference between the two because ultimately, white people tried to pass it off as black people being threatening and therefore they had to be put down, while black people pushed the true narrative, which was that they were attacked for essentially no reason because they were successful. So, depending on which account you hear first at the time, people were divided into two camps. And those camps were usually down racial lines because of just how race relations were at the time. So, those who heard the true narrative were obviously furious that white people could once again attack and destroy the lives of black people and once again face no consequences, essentially. There were no consequences for anyone involved in the race riots that were white, while white people saw themselves as sort of justified in the attack because it was based, they pushed the narrative that it was because a, um, Dick Rowland raped the white elevator operator, but because of the fact that that was a false claim, it just goes to show that uh, sort of people will do anything to justify violence because they know ultimately they're not in the right, you know? So, the Tulsa Massacre, it's it's only one of hundreds of race riots that have happened in this country, and it's really important for Americans to learn about the violence that has been used to subjugate people in the minority because it really shows why things are the way they are right now. Because the fact that over and over when black people have been able to be successful, they've been pushed down and forced to start all over, sometimes with less resources than they had when they first started, which explains why, when people show statistics of black people are poorer than white people, it's not because black people don't work hard or because they're lazy or whatever other stereotypes you want to push. It's because this country has constantly taken away everything they've achieved and forced them not to start at square one, but square negative one. Every time they they build something, the system has forced them to give it up. So learning about this history, it's important because it helps us move forward and it helps us understand why things like reparations are important. So I encourage you to do further research. Once again, I'll be linking a primary source document in the description. So please take a look at that. And yeah, just keep learning about history because if you don't, we're bound to repeat the mistakes and the tragedies that have happened in the past. So I'll see you again in a bit in the next video, and we'll continue to discuss important parts of history that unfortunately aren't always represented. Thank you for joining me.